Hey everybody. All right. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but this is the final video lesson of the 2021 school year. I honestly didn't know if even I was going to make it through these there for a little bit, but hey, we soldiered on and here we are. So this is the end of World War II. And I also, of course, talk about the beginning of the Cold War because, it's kind of World War II kind of sets that up. So, without further ado, here's the final lesson of your world history class. All right. So, we ended lesson 5. That's the last time we were actually talking about like battles. Okay. 6 was talking about kind of the home front. And then 7, of course, the Holocaust. So, lesson 8, we're looking back at battles and again, like overall the fighting and the end of the war. So, the Axis are going to surrender in North Africa and Tunisia on May 13th, 1943. And at that point in time, we are going to cross the Mediterranean and get onto the Italian peninsula and begin pushing our way north. The Italian peninsula, a lot of times, isn't really looked at extensively during World War II because, of course, D Day comes in there in North France and kind of steals the show, so to speak. But these men deserve a moment for sure within this class. I mean, the men that fight in North Africa with Patton, chasing Rommel across the desert, that again eventually leads to their surrender. But then, there were a lot of campaigns on the Italian peninsula that were very, very tough, very bloody, lots of heroism and bravery. We have several Medal of Honor recipients that come out of the Italian arena of World War II. And so, again, and this is also important because, hello, you need to take out Mussolini. A lot of students, of course, look at, they kind of almost forget about Mussolini, right? Because the focus becomes so much on Hitler. And I mean, yeah, okay. But, Mussolini is a part of that Axis power. And so as we are coming up from the south, the Soviets are coming in from the east. And then, of course, D-Day will allow the other Allied forces to be coming in from the west. But you have to have that southern component. I mean, you have to have the North African and again southern portions of the Third Reich also dealt with. And so, um, there for a while, Mussolini, of course, once he's pushed out of the southern portion of the peninsula, is going to run kind of like a puppet state that Hitler and the Germans are going to set up. But for the most part, again, by about mid 44, it's going to be obvious that the Allies are taking over. So, speaking of mid 1944, of course, June 6th, 1944 is D-Day, probably the most important moment, yes, in World War II. This was our huge final push um, into mainland Western Europe to try to defeat Hitler. And we are going to, of course, as Americans, hit the beaches codenamed Omaha and Utah, and then you're going to have British and Canadian forces hit the code names beaches Gold, Juno, and Sword. Um, the beaches that were the most heavily fortified and therefore difficult to establish a beachhead on were Utah and Omaha. We see so many casualties in those first waves of men that come in because we are basically sitting ducks. I mean, the Germans have, huge concrete bunkers with, outfitted with tons of machine guns and lots of ammunition. And so, the first wave of men that hit those beaches were, in my personal opinion, some of the bravest soldiers that probably have ever fought. And because they were staring down almost certain death and, still ran out and, did their duty for their country. Um, you know, without the success of D-Day and without that huge push into, northern France, who I don't know what the outcome of the war might have been. It may not have gone in our favor. I mean, you never really know. Um, Again, this was that huge moment within the war where we finally get into France and start pushing Germany back into German territory. Um, also, I just challenge you guys just to study this day, more extensively than I'm telling you about it. We have paratrooper divisions that fly in the night before, that land behind enemy lines, in little squads of like 5 and 6 men, because they get scattered all out over Kingdom Come. And they're having to take bridges and towns and roads, and I mean they're pretty much just alone, until those waves start getting further inland of infantry soldiers. And so, just again, like the heroism and the bravery and the sacrifice over the course of between June 5th and really, about June 10th. I mean, it's really amazing to study in depth. This is just a quick documentary, just kind of giving you the basics of D-Day. And then, if you ever want to see a legit representation of what D-Day really might have been like, of course, just watch the first 30 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. It's an incredible movie if you haven't already seen it. There were actually D-Day survivors when this movie came out that watched the movie and said, aside from their memories, this was the most real and authentic version of D-Day that they had ever seen, um, you know, reproduced. So, that's pretty high honors and accolades. So again, do yourself a favor and watch it, but prepare yourself too, because it's pretty bloody and pretty tough at times to get through. So obviously, if we go from D-Day, which is June 1944, to like victory in Europe, which is May 1945, it's almost a year's worth of stuff that takes place. And I wish I had the time to get into all of the differing moments, and that happen, within that year, because there are some incredible battles and incredible acts of bravery that are going to, happen. But we just don't have that kind of time. So I am going to talk, however, about the Battle of the Bulge, because it becomes an incredibly important, very, very big battle between, it's kind of like the big final showdown between the Allies and the Axis powers. After the Battle of the Bulge, we are going to really push into German territory, and it's very much the end of Nazi Germany. And I, again, like the little box with my face in it is in the way. But if you look at this map, it's called the Battle of the Bulge because over here in red are the Nazi forces, and then over here in blue are the Allied, so combined British and American forces. It's going to be called the Bulge because the Germans are going to create this bulge in our line. They are going to hit our line with a huge amount of resources because, of course, they're scrambling. I mean, we are officially getting into German territory with our line at the point of the Battle of the Bulge. And this is going to be December and January of 1944 and into 45. The Battle of the Bulge also sees the 101st Airborne Division right here completely surrounded when the Germans do hit us and create this bulge in our line. And their story is also really amazing to study, because they're for a solid like 6 weeks they're just surrounded, but they hold their position right there. So it's really just it's a remarkable, again, story of resilience. So the Axis powers, the Nazis, are going to have kind of this moment of increased morale because of the bulge, and they are going to seemingly have us kind of at a disadvantage and on the run, because a huge snowstorm sets in and the weather conditions get really, really bad. And we can't get supply lines in very easily. So our men are sitting there undersupplied. They're not dressed appropriately. And it is really, really difficult. And we lose a large amount of men, not just due to battle, but really because of the weather conditions. Men freeze to death during the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes Forest. And so, but eventually we're going to get supplies in, we're going to get our Air Force in, and that bulge is going to go away. Our line is going to even back out. And of course, we are going to push into Germany. And just take a minute and look at the map, because you see, you see the eastern portion of France, you see Belgium, you see the western portion of the Netherlands. Behind my head is Luxembourg, and all of that has been taken back just in 6-7 months of the landing of D-Day. And again, so just take a minute and realize that from the landing of D-Day on June 6th, 1944 to December of 1944, we had taken all of that back. And so again, like, it's incredibly important in understanding. This is another short documentary about the Battle of the Bulge that, again, I always want you to watch. So by April of 1945, the Soviets are making their way from the east into German territory, and specifically Berlin. The Soviets are going to come in and take Berlin, and Hitler will very famously commit suicide in the bunker on April 30th, 1945, with his wife, Eva Braun. Yes, there are tons of conspiracy theories that say, did he get out? Did he really commit suicide? Did he escape? I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that, but regardless, he's dead by now. So check. And then on May 7th, 1945, Germany will unconditionally surrender in what becomes known as VE Day, or Victory over Europe. All right. Yes, it's over with in Europe by May of 1945, but it is not over with in the Pacific. You still have Japan, who is going and saying, we're not done yet. So there are two battles in 1945 that are incredibly important to understanding kind of the end of the Pacific theater of the war, and that is Iwo Jima, which is going to happen right here in February of 1945, and then Okinawa, which will be from April to June of 1945. Both battles are strategic, but also very, very bloody and costly for the Allies, and specifically the Americans. Okinawa especially. We took Iwo Jima because there were two huge airfields there that we needed Japan, of course, not to have access to, but we also wanted to utilize them as well. Okinawa was taken because we looked at it as a potential staging ground for the land invasion of Japan. There's been a lot of criticism here, really, in the recent time of Okinawa, and was it really necessary, because it was such a bloody battle, and we lost so many men at it, that and then we really didn't utilize our position at Okinawa because there was never a land invasion, because of course we end up sending in the atomic bombs. But and so when you look at it that way, it does seem kind of like an incredible waste, because we didn't do a land invasion, so we didn't need Okinawa as this base staging ground. But in April of 1945, when that battle was launched, we also didn't know definitively whether or not the bombs worked, and if, of course, we were even ever going to utilize them. And so, I think it's one of those, in preparation for the land invasion, it was strategic. Of course, the very famous picture, the flag being pulled up, is going to be from Iwo Jima. And again, very huge casualties on both sides, and bloody, awful. But very important, again, to getting us here and right there in the backyard of Japan. And that at this point in time, once we secure Iwo Jima and Okinawa, we are going to start bombing the ever living tar out of mainland Japan. Now, this is an amazing movie. It's a clip from the movie called Hacksaw Ridge. It is based on a true story of Desmond Doss. Excuse me. He's a man who refused to carry a weapon on religious grounds, and he is going to become a medic in World War II and save 75 men at Okinawa. Of course, he will receive the Medal of Honor, and it's called Hacksaw Ridge because he is basically going to save these 75 men by getting them off of this ridge that gets nicknamed that. This clip kind of shows you the brutality of the Japanese soldiers and how the Pacific, you had much more like hand-to-hand combat than versus Europe. And that the Japanese, again, culturally, the way that they viewed warfare and how they fought was very different than Western standards of warfare and kind of like accepted gentlemanly practices of warfare. And I know it sounds kind of like an oxymoron statement, but there are like do's and don'ts and unspoken rules of engagement and things like that when you're talking about war. And there was a huge cultural divide there. And so it's funny, students today have been watching this and they're like, oh my gosh, did that really happen? Did they really do that? And I'm like, yes, but to them, that was actually considered incredibly honorable. Like, whereas we look at that and go like, oh my gosh, they look at that and go like, wow, look at how brave he was. And it's again, it's just a huge cultural difference. So I challenge you to, if you want, not just watch the clip, but again, watch these whole movies. I actually posted a Google Doc just full of movies that I've watched that are based around World War II that are very good. So in the United States, you have another massive event happen, and that is FDR, our president, is going to die in April of 1945. He dies of natural causes. He kind of just had health issues. Of course, he's in a wheelchair because of polio. He gets polio in his 20s, and becomes wheelchair bound, and either 20s or his 30s. I can't really remember. And anyways, he's going to pass away, and his vice president, Harry Truman, of course, will then take his place. And here Truman is left with the, incredible task of finishing this out, and FDR had been our president for like 16 years at this point. And so, Truman's going like, okay, so, no pressure. And due to the Manhattan Project, of course, the development of the atomic bomb was done. They had tested it. We knew that they worked by the summer of 45. And Japan just straight up would not surrender. Again, even after we took Iwo Jima and then Okinawa and then started massively bombing mainland Japan, they would not capitulate. They would not surrender. Well, again, the war in Europe is over by May 1945. So Stalin and the Soviets then come over and start invading the territory that Japan held in, northwestern Asia, and they start pushing in to, basically like Mongolia, northern China, the Korean Peninsula. And we continue bombing, and we're like, come on, we've got you surrounded. Here the American naval fleet is in your back door in the Pacific, and Stalin and his army is now approaching, from the northwest. Like, give it up, man. And they just won't do it. And so Truman makes the incredibly difficult and also still to this day very controversial decision to drop an atomic bomb. So he, a lot of the rationale behind why he chose to do this, I have students ask me all the time, like, how did he make this decision? Why did he make this decision? So a land invasion of Japan by us had been predicted to cost another 100,000 lives. And at this point in time in the war, Truman, again, he knew this bomb, what it was capable of, and it had been tested, and we had two of them in our arsenal. And he chose those 100,000 American soldiers. I mean, that's what he chose. And so he drops it, and he really truly believed, like, if I drop one, they're gonna surrender, like that, surely this is gonna it's gonna be done. But I mean, if this tells you the resolve of the Japanese, I mean, even after the bombing of Hiroshima on August 6th, 1945, they still don't surrender. And so the second bomb, 3 days later, is then dropped, of course, on August 9th at Nagasaki. And after that, you have the surrender of the Japanese. They're going to surrender officially on August 14th, 1945, which becomes Victory over Japan Day, or VJ Day. And then they will sign the paperwork on September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, which its nickname is the Mighty Mo. You can actually still go see the Mighty Mo. It's turned into a floating museum there in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. So World War II, by September of 1945, is officially over. The Axis have lost. The Allies have won. But unfortunately, the death toll is massive. You had close to 20 million men die in battle. You had 20 million civilians die. And overall, though, you have people estimate 50 to 60 million people who died total due to World War II. So obviously, the world saw lots of devastation because of World War II. This is, again, just a quick kind of summation and wrap up of the end of the war. Now, Cold War. Okay, the dropping of the atomic bombs, as it says, marks the beginning of the nuclear age. It marks the beginning of an entirely new set of problems, really. And now you have this incredible technology that we know is massively devastating, and all the powers that be want their hands on them. And so the Cold War is going to be a period of huge political tension following World War II between the Soviet Union and the United States. It's not going to end really until the Soviet Union falls in 1991, but it's going to begin as early as 1947. So the big question is always like, well, oh my gosh, weren't they our allies? Sure, but like I said, Stalin was our ally simply because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It wasn't because we liked Stalin, or, I mean, who could like Stalin? I mean, come on, I've taught you about the guy at this point. He was really almost worse than Hitler. And so, it's no big surprise that once Hitler is dealt with, and the Japanese are also dealt with, and World War II is over, that we kind of are like, okay, so we don't we tolerated you because we needed to get rid of the threat to both of us, but now that that's over, like, we're going to go back to really kind of hating you and not liking you very much. And anyways, the end of World War II also saw the partitioning, of course, of Germany. Okay, like, who's going to control differing parts of Germany? Because obviously we can't allow them to control themselves, or we're just going to see, the Fourth Reich emerge, and we can't have that happen. And so they start having this conversation in February of 45. And because it becomes obvious, like, that we are winning, and they start trying to figure out, okay, when this is over, what are we going to do? Stalin, of course, is deeply suspicious, does not want democracy because, of course, it's going to threaten his power. He feels as if America and the British are going to kind of like railroad his authority in the East, and he wants communism. He wants a dictatorship, and he wants communism. And And this is, he doesn't want democratic institutions. Whereas, again, Roosevelt and Churchill favor the liberated portions of Europe to choose and to be able to have democratic institutions set up. So they're already politically, economically, philosophically at odds with each other, in these conferences. Churchill and Stalin, they both accept the United Nations. That this is another thing that is, kind of goes back even to World War I with the League of Nations. Well, Roosevelt really pushes that we need a United Nations. Again, where you have everybody coming together and trying to maintain peace. Kind of maybe like 2.0 will work, because obviously the League of Nations did not. So the big three, again, which is Soviet Union, the United States, and Britain, so that's Stalin, FDR, then followed by Truman, and then Churchill, are going to divide Germany, as you can see, into these 4 zones, one each for the US, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Okay. The Potsdam Conference of July 1945, again, is marred with mistrust. No one believes Stalin will honor democratic elections in these freely liberated Eastern countries. And they're going to be proven right. I mean, Stalin responded in saying a freely elected government in any of these East European countries would be anti-Soviet, and that we cannot allow. He wants more power. He wants more land, which again has always meant more power. And he feels like Eastern Europe should be his. He's kind of like, I'm the one that defeated Hitler from the East. I'm the one that actually came into Berlin and finally truly beat him. So y'all owe me all of this, was kind of his viewpoint. Again, whereas Truman and Churchill were kind of like, the people of those areas deserve to choose what type of government they want. And Stalin, obviously doesn't want that, because he knows no one wants to be under Stalin's rule. I mean, the man's a freak show. So, that's kind of the beginning, again, of the Cold War. All right. So, but even more, another pressing issue is, what do we do with all of these Nazis now, especially that we understand what the Holocaust entailed, all these Nazis that we've caught. Oh my gosh, like, we've got to hold them accountable. And so they are going to have the Nuremberg trials. They have it at Nuremberg because, of course, like, full circle, the Nuremberg laws are what, stripped Jews of their citizenship and, took their just basic rights away from them. Well, now we're going to actually hang you people and sentence you to death because of war crimes in Nuremberg. So again, like, full circle irony there. So lots of Nazi leaders are going to be killed at Nuremberg. Unfortunately, you're also going to see some very top-ranking Nazis escape to South America, where they will live, some for really, decades before they're caught and brought to justice. Others are never caught. So unfortunately, not all of them get caught and dealt with. So, again, the new war is definitely the Cold War. Many in the West thought Soviet policy was part of a worldwide, communist conspiracy. The Soviets viewed Western and, especially American policy as nothing less than just global capitalist expansion. And so again, just philosophically, politically, economically, just we were totally at odds with each other. And you're going to see the Iron Curtain come down over Eastern Europe. Churchill very famously is going to name Stalin's taking over of that whole area as his Iron Curtain. And really, I mean, again, within just a couple of years after World War II, you're going to see the Cold War emerge. And that's as far as I can take you. But there are lots more lessons to come your junior year about the Cold War. Much of your American history class your junior year will center around conflicts and issues during the mid to late 20th century about the Cold War. So if you're kind of bummed that this is where we're ending right here at the start of another major conflict, don't worry, more to come. So I hope you guys have an absolutely awesome summer. I've enjoyed having y'all as students, even though many of you I've never even met in person. I've been able to communicate with you, of course, via classroom and emails, and still care about you guys and wish you nothing but the best. When everything's back to normal next year, you're gonna have to come by and say hi. And with that being said, signing off for the last time. Bye bye.